Hey guys, how's it going? Realm Gaming here, back with another video. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Deathknight. We're going to talk about some core abilities. We're going to go over some of their talents, try to do sort of an in-depth guide for beginners to try and learn the class, try to learn the ins and outs, and all of the intricacies that come with it. Now, while this is a beginner guide, I think intermediate players can still find some value out of this, especially if you haven't really dug deep into your talent tree, because that's going to kind of be the focus of this video. So if that sounds interesting, go ahead and stick around. Let's get into the video. Alright, so just kind of the core of Frost Deathknight is they work off this rune and runic power system, right? So when I come in here and I use abilities, I start to build up this runic power, of which I can then spend on other abilities such as Frost Strike, such as Glacial Advance, and that will spend my runic power. So the whole point of the spec is to be balancing these two states. When you get a lot of runic power, you're going to dump it with runic power spenders. When you get low on runic power, you're going to generate it with runes. So just a quick example to show you what this looks like. You can see here I have 0 runic power. I go in here, I start hitting some things. I start to generate that runic power. And as you can see, when I come in here and use Glacial Advance or Frost Strike, it'll start to spend it. All right, so let's talk about probably your two core rune spenders first. The first one's going to be Howling Blast. And if this works, I have it on my one key here. Let's just read it out. You blast a target with wind, dealing X amount of frost damage, and reduce damage to all other enemies within 10 yards. So it's like an AOE effect. And you cast it. And what it's going to do, it's going to put this, I think it's called Frost Fever Disease on the target. And that's going to be like a ticking dot that you kind of want to manage. And you want to make sure that you're keeping it up on all your targets as often as possible. So in just a quick nutshell, that's basically what Howling Blast is. It's gonna only cost 1 rune, it does AoE damage, and it puts a disease on your target. It does more than just that, which we'll get into here in just a minute, but first I want to talk about Obliterate. Next we have Obliterate, and just to put this simply for now, this does get a little bit more complex as we get into the tree, but just know that it costs 2 runes, and it's an attack that deals X amount of physical damage. So these are going to be your 2 main spenders, is Howling Blast and Obliterate. And you can kind of see based on how the tree is shaped, right? You sort of have this Howling Blast side, you sort of have this Obliterate side. So you can kind of see how these are going to be your 2 main abilities just based on how the tree is shaped. Everything kind of stems from those 2 abilities. So when I come in here, I type in Howling Blast, you can see the right-hand side of the tree has a lot of things that synergize with it. And when you type in Obliterate, on the left-hand side of the tree, you can see there's a lot of things that synergize with it. All right, so now let's go a step deeper, right? We have Killing Machine on the Obliterate side, and we have Ryme on the Howling Blast side. So for Killing Machine, your auto attack critical strikes have a chance to make your next Obliterate deal frost damage and critical strike. So that's really important because this is going to be something that procs in your rotation, and we'll look at that here in just a second. We also have Ryme here. Obliterate has a 45% chance to cause your next Howling Blast to consume no runes and deal 300% additional damage. That's also very important. This is another thing that you'll kind of have to track somewhat. It will proc on your character, and when that proc happens, you want to consume it by casting Howling Blast. You can see I have 2 procs of Killing Machine now, so my next 2 Obliterates will be critical strikes. So there's 1 and there's 2. So the question is, how do we get this to proc, right? So if we go back and we look at the tooltip Killing Machine, it's from your auto attack critical strikes. So as you're doing your rotation, this is just going to kind of pop up. So as you can see here, I've been auto attacking this dummy. You see I have Killing Machine here that's procced, and I've got these 2 little frost symbols that have appeared on my screen. And that means Killing Machine is ready to consume. So again, once you consume this, that means your next Obliterate is going to be a critical strike. Your Obliterate glows here, so you just press it. Now it crits. All right, up next, on the right-hand side of the tree, we have something called Ryme. And this does kind of work in with your Obliterate on the left-hand side of the tree. So your Obliterate has a 45% chance to cause your next Howling Blast to consume no runes and deal 300% additional damage. So this is going to be something else that we kind of have to keep track of, along with Killing Machine. Thankfully, the game makes it very obvious that this is procced, just like on your Obliterates and on your Killing Machine. So let's use a few Obliterates here. And here is how you know Ryme has procced, is you get the frost symbol at the top. And again, Ryme does 300% additional damage. It consumes no runes and generates no runic power. So you press it and it did a whole bunch more damage essentially. So these are basically going to be two core things within your rotation that you're going to have to track and manage. And in my opinion, they add a lot of flavor to the rotation. I really like managing these two. Now, if you notice with Obliterate, it's only a single target that it hits. That's kind of annoying, right? If you're in a Mythic Plus dungeon, you got a whole bunch of mobs around you, how do you sort of cleave with this spec? Well, that is where Cleaving Strikes comes into play on the left-hand side of your tree. Obliterate hits 2 additional enemies while you remain in your Death and Decay. So what the heck is Death and Decay? How does it affect our rotation? So read it out here. Death and Decay corrupts the ground, does AoE damage, and while you remain within the area, your Obliterate will hit 2 additional targets. So let's take a quick look at this, at these dummies over here. So essentially what you're going to want to do is drop Death and Decay and Obliterate within it. And now you can see it's doing AoE damage. That's going to be a very large source, probably the main source of your damage within a Mythic Plus dungeon. This is also very nice to pair with something like Killing Machine here, because this will make your Obliterate's critical strike on all the targets that it cleaves. So this is why Frost Deathknight is so good in like 2, 3, 4 packs at a time. And it's part of the reason that they kind of fall off as pack sizes get bigger and bigger. So a few noticeable spells that do affect Obliterate. Of course, we talked about Ryme earlier, so Obliterate has a 45% chance to proc Ryme. We also have Improved Obliterate, so increases its damage by 10%. So you want to be speccing into this, especially if you're going the Obliterate build. We also have Ice Cap here, so your Frost Strike and Obliterate will reduce the remaining cooldown of your Pillar of Frost by 2 seconds. So Pillar of Frost is right here in the middle of the tree. This is probably going to be one of your main cooldowns. It's already on a short cooldown, it's 1 minute. So you're going to be having this up a lot during your rotation. So it's something you really want to keep an eye on, because spamming Frost Strikes, spamming Obliterates, you're going to be taking like 30 seconds off the cooldown. So really it's on like a 30-second cooldown if you are speccing into Ice Cap here. So not only that, this kind of stems off of Pillar of Frost and Ice Caps even more, is Enduring Strength. So when Pillar of Frost expires, your strength is increased by 10% if 1 point, 20% if 2 points for 6 seconds. This effect lasts 2 seconds longer for each Obliterate and Frost Scythe critical strike during Pillar of Frost. So we're not running Frost Scythe at the moment, so you can kind of cross that off for now. But Obliterate will add 2 seconds to this Enduring Strength buff that you get. So it's kind of trying to extend the duration of Pillar of Frost. Obviously, you're not getting as much strength from it, but it does kind of extend the effect, almost working as like a mini version of Pillar of Frost. So that kind of gives you a pretty good overview of Obliterate, right? You're going to want to use it in single target scenarios, cleave scenarios. It reduces the cooldown of a lot of your major offensive cooldowns. So you want to be weaving in Obliterates as much as possible. It also generates runic power for us. So Obliterate is really the core of your class. All right, so now let's go into Glacial Advance here, right? So we generated all this runic power with Howling Blast. We generated all this runic power with Obliterate. What do we do with it? How do we spend it? So this is where Glacial Advance will come into play, especially in AoE scenarios. So I'll just kind of show you what it looks like. Actually, first let's read it out. So summon spikes from the ground that advance forward. Each deals 6,000 frost damage, and it applies Razor Ice to enemies near their eruption point. Now, one other thing that I did forget to mention earlier is Razor Ice. So Razor Ice, just kind of talk about it really quick. Engrave your weapon with the rune that causes 92% extra weapon damage as frost damage and increases enemies' vulnerability to your frost attacks by 3%, stacking up to 5 times. So you can proc this in 2 ways, and what I forgot to tell you is you can actually proc this with Ryme. So just going here really quick, that's not Ryme. Let me obliterate a few times to proc Ryme. Okay, so we finally got Ryme to proc here. You can see we got 10 seconds on it. So when I use this, it's going to put Razor Ice on the target as well as Frost Fever for that increased damage. So that's how you put Razor Ice on a target, and single target is through Ryme. For AoE scenarios, we're going to be using, kind of coming full circle here, back to Glacial Advance. So at the end of the tooltip, you can see deals damage and it applies Razor Ice to enemies near their eruption point. So just to kind of show you what that looks like, you see I got full runic power here. Let's spin some of this. And you can see all these targets are getting this stacking Razor Ice. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see it caps out here at 5 stacks. That is, of course, another thing that you'll sort of have to micromanage throughout your rotation, but it just, for the most part, it happens naturally. It's not something you really need to worry about too much. As long as you're casting, you're using Rymes for single target scenarios, you're going to get it on the raid boss that you're fighting. For AoE scenarios, just know that you'll be spending Runic power on Glacial Advance. Alright, so Glacial Advance is going to be our Runic power spender in AoE scenarios. Let's talk about single target scenarios. We will have Frost Strike. So Frost Strike is very similar. It looks very similar to like an Obliterate. However, it just uses Runic power instead of using runes. So as you can see here, I've built up some Runic power, and I can now spin that with Frost Strikes. So I spent them there, and you can see I ran out of Runic power. Now, a few noticeable talents that do synergize well with Frost Strike, of course, is going to be Improved Frost Strike. Increases the flat damage of it by 20%. Again, we have Ice Cap, which we kind of talked about earlier with Obliterate. This is going to reduce the cooldown on your Pillar of Frost by 2 seconds. We also run Cold-Blooded Rage. So Frost Strike has a 20% chance on critical strikes to grant Killing Machine. So once again, if you're critical striking with Frost Strike, if you're critical striking with your auto attacks, that's going to be 2 ways that you can proc your Killing Machine. And of course, we have Obliteration at the bottom of our tree here that synergizes with it really well. This is a very strong talent. Highly recommend to take it if you are going the Obliteration build. But basically, while Pillar of Frost is active, which it will be for probably most of the time due to how Ice Caps works on our rotation, Frost Strike, Glacial Advance, and Howling Blast will always grant Killing Machine, and they have a 30% chance to generate a rune. So this is going to be really awesome, especially if you pair it with something like Lust, and then you pop Pillar of Frost. You're just going to have so many things to spend within that short sort of window there. So it really turns the spec into a sort of fast play style. You have a lot of different buttons that you can press, and it's important not to get overwhelmed and just press something random. You want to make sure that you're pressing, whatever is highest on the priority list, which most of the time it's going to be Obliteration or Howling Blast or consuming Killing Machine or Ryme, just depending on the situation that you're in, right? All right, another very core talent that we are taking this season due to how it works with our tier piece is Chill Streak. So you deal 10,000 frost damage to the target, it reduces their movement speed, and it bounces between targets. It's on a 45-second cooldown. So just to kind of show you what it looks like here, I'll cast it. It's on my E. It's going to throw out a little snowball, and it's going to kind of bounce around in between the target. Now, the reason this is so important this season is due to how it works with our tier set bonus. As you can see here, the 2 set Chill Streak's range is increased by 4 yards and can bounce off of you. So that means it's going to be really good for single target scenarios. If it has nothing to bounce off of, it can always bounce off of you. Each time Chill Streak bounces, your damage is increased by 4% for 12 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. So it's really not strong for the damage it does itself, but it's strong because of the buff that it gives you, right? Increases your damage by 4%, 5 times 20% additional damage, right? And once again, going down to our 4 set here, it's not so much the damage of the ability, but the effects it gives you. It can bounce 3 additional times, and each time it bounces, you have a 35% chance to gain a rune, reduce Chill Streak cooldown by 5 seconds, or reduce the cooldown of Empower Rune by 6 seconds. So this is just going to kind of work as a flat buff to a lot of your baseline abilities, to some of your cooldowns, just to kind of help it synergize with as many different situations as it possibly can. So in a nutshell, that's Chill Streak. Let's go ahead and move on to some other abilities here. We'll kind of talk about some major cooldowns really quick, and then we'll probably wrap up the video. Let's quickly just talk about utility here, right? You have Antimagic Shell. It's going to put this green orb around your character, and this is basically going to make you absorb magic damage. So So on a pretty short cooldown, 40 seconds, so just make sure that you're using it on, like bursting, for example. Antimagic Shell will absorb that. Another ability that we haven't really talked about yet is Death Strike. So Death Strike is going to be really good in scenarios where you're taking a lot of damage. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it does heal you. So reading it out here, focuses dark power into a strike with both weapons that deals a total of 4,000 physical damage and heals you for 40% of all damage taken in the last 5 seconds. And it does have a minimum of, you're going to at least get about 10% of your maximum life back. So again, something that you do want to utilize during something like bursting, right? You're taking all that damage. It's going to take that damage, it's going to revert it back into healing if you do time it accordingly, based on how much damage your character's taken within the past few seconds. So really strong heal here. It does cost 35 runic power, so it can feel a little bit awkward if you're low on runic power and you need a heal in a pinch. You're probably going to have to, revert to something like a health pot. But if you do have the runic power and you are in that pinch, you can of course spend it using something like Death Strike. We have Death Advance here. You got 2 charges of it due to talents. This is going to be just a speed up. So to cast it here, it's going to increase your movement speed by 35%. You cannot be reduced below 100% normal movement speed. You want to use that as often as possible as your sort of movement utility, because just Deathknight in general is a very slow sort of wheelchair class. It's just kind of how it works. You do a lot of damage, but in return, you can't move around very quickly, right? Then we have probably one of our main defensives here. We have Icebound Fortitude. This is going to make you take 30% less damage for 8 seconds. Just show you what that looks like. You press it, does this little effect, and you get a buff here. That's 8 seconds. One talent we have not taken so far is Antimagic Zone. This is a pretty iconic Deathknight ability or talent. It depends on what content you're doing. Certain content you'll take it, certain content you won't. You'll see it a lot more in raids because it can affect the entire raid versus a Mythic Plus. You only got like 5 people, you don't get as much of value out of it. But basically what it does, it puts this dome on the ground and all members standing in it are going to take 20% less damage for the duration of the zone, or until 500,000 damage is absorbed by the zone. You can of course go into Assimilation here, which will increase the amount that Antimagic Zone will absorb by 10% and give you a refund of runic power up to 100 runic power based on how much the shield absorbed. All right, I know I didn't cover all of the utility, but this will be an hour-long video if I go over every single thing here. So let's go back into some of our offensive cooldowns. We've already talked about Pillar of Frost, so I'm going to skip over that and how it synergizes with Frost Strike and Obliterate. So up next here we have Remorseless Winter, which is on a 20-second cooldown. This is going to be really good to use in AoE scenarios, and it does cost 1 rune. The way this works is basically it puts an AoE sort of frost blizzard storm around your character. It's going to reduce their movement speed and do like a pulsing AoE damage. So going up to the dummies here, I'll cast it really quick, and you can see here it's doing that pulsing damage, and it does an okay amount of damage. It's definitely something you're going to keep on cooldown regardless of whatever content you're doing, whether it's raiding or Mythic Plus. You want to be casting this as often as possible. Up next we have Empower Rune Weapon here. So this is going to be on a 2-minute cooldown, and this is going to empower your weapon, granting 15% haste like a mini Bloodlust here, and it's going to generate 1 rune and 5 runic power instantly, and then 5 runic power for every 20 seconds. Every 5 seconds for 20 seconds. This is an interesting ability because we actually have it also on our spec tree over here. So you can actually take this twice to get 2 charges. If you are going the Obliterate build, it seems like in most cases you do not take it on the spec tree. But if you do run like the Breath of Sindragosa build, you can go into it. Just because the way it works with the talent, it synergizes with it on a 2-minute cooldown. It's going to give you that sort of burst through Breath of Sindragosa. I'm just not realizing my camera has been screwed up for like literally the entire video, so that's awesome. We're not going to re-record, we're just going to power through it. So we will quickly talk about Breath of Sindragosa here in a bit. It's not a build that I particularly enjoy, but it has been meta for many, many seasons now. It's not at the moment, but it could come back at any time, so I'd like to at least cover it briefly. We'll get into that here shortly. And then finally, we have Abomination Limb on a 2-minute cooldown. This is really going to do a lot of damage. This comes from Shadowlands. This was a Shadowlands ability that had been brought over to Dragonflight. It's really fun to play around because the way it works is when you use the ability, it pulls all the mobs into your character. So it kind of works as like a hybrid between utility and damage. And the reason it's so strong in Mythic Plus is because when you get all those mobs grouped into a very tight-knit area, you can do a lot of spread. Everybody in your group can do a ton of spread efficient cleave damage. And, you know, that's, in my opinion, is one of the best perks of bringing a Deathknight into your group is you can use this. You can use Death Grip to grip mobs out of sanguine pools. You can really have a lot of mob control, a lot of mob positioning throughout the run just through a Deathknight. But just quickly to show you what this ability looks like here, we'll cast it. It's going to do a whole bunch of like hands coming out of the ground, green effect, and it's going to do, again, like a pulsing AoE damage. Now let's quickly take a look at Breath of Sindragosa here. I just put some random talents into here. I do not recommend this build that I'm showing you in any way for like raiding or Mythic Plus. I just took 5 random talents out, put them on the right hand side just to show you what the ability looks like in case you're brand new. So to read it out, continuously deals 7,000 frost damage every 1 second to the enemies in a cone in front of you until your runic power is exhausted. Deals reduced damage to secondary targets. Generates 2 runes at the start and end of the ability. So the way you want to use this, if you do decide to go this build, is you want to build up all your runic power as much as you can, and you're going to try to funnel all of your cooldowns behind Breath of Sindragosa. So your rotation is going to kind of focus on these really bursty 2-minute cooldown cleaves. All right, so to kind of showcase what this looks like, you can see here I have it on my Shift Q hotkey here. We've built up full runic power, and the way that it'll work is when I press the ability, it's going to start draining my runic power, and it's going to do this like breath of frost damage in front of my character. So to show you what that looks like, and as I continue to generate runic power here, it will continue to cast. And I guess one other stupid thing that I forgot here is Raise Ally. It's on a 10-minute cooldown. This is going to be your form of battle res. It's combat resurrection that you can use in Mythic Plus content. It's one of the main reasons that we are invited to groups. So the way it works is it is an instant cast, but due to it being an instant cast, there's a spender involved with it. It's going to be 30 runic power. It's not that much, but sometimes you can find yourself in an awkward situation where you don't have the runic power to, you know, revive your healer or whatever, whoever's dead. So, you know, it's just something you want to be mindful of. You always want to try to have at least 30 runic power. You don't really want to go down to 0. Always have that small buffer that you can kind of rely on, especially for that and also for death strikes as well. You always want some runic power there to be able to do something in a pinch. And I guess the final thing I want to talk about here is what rune you put on your character. This is going to be Rune of the Fallen Crusader. You're going to use this for pretty much all content, regardless if it's raid or Mythic Plus. It doesn't matter. This is going to be the rune that you run. Engrave your weapon with a rune that has a chance to heal you for 7% of your max health and increase your total strength by 18% for 5 seconds. So this is by far and away going to outscale any other rune or any other enchant that you can buy from the auction house to enchant on your weapon. So just make sure that this is the rune that you're running for all content. Alright guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and we will see you on the next one.